Chapter 4. No one was kinder to me at that time than Rose Waterford. She combined a masculine intelligence with a feminine perversity, and the novels she wrote were original and disconcerting. It was at her house one day that I met Charles Strickland's wife. Miss Waterford was giving a tea party, and her small room was more than usually full. Everyone seemed to be talking, and I, sitting in silence, felt awkward, but I was too shy to break into any of the groups that seemed absorbed in their own affairs. Miss Waterford was a good hostess, and seeing my embarrassment came up to me. "I want you to talk to Mrs. Strickland," she said. "She's raving about your book." "What does she do?" I asked. I was conscious of my ignorance, and if Mrs. Strickland was a well-known writer, I thought it as well to ascertain the fact before I spoke to her. Rose Waterford cast down her eyes demurely to give greater effect to her reply. "She gives luncheon parties. You've only got to roar a little, and she'll ask you." Rose Waterford was a cynic. She looked upon life as an opportunity for writing novels and the public as her raw material. Now and then she invited members of it to her house if they showed an appreciation of her talent and entertained with proper lavishness. She held their weakness for lions in good-humored contempt, but played to them her part of the distinguished woman of letters with decorum. I was led up to Mrs. Strickland, and for 10 minutes we talked together. I noticed nothing about her except that she had a pleasant voice. She had a flat in Westminster, overlooking the unfinished cathedral, and because we lived in the same neighborhood we felt friendly disposed to one another. The Army and Navy stores are a bond of union between all who dwell between the river and St. James's Park. Mrs. Strickland asked me for my address, and a few days later I received an invitation to luncheon. My engagements were few, and I was glad to accept. When I arrived, a little late, because in my fear of being too early I had walked 3 times round the cathedral, I found the party already complete. Miss Waterford was there and Mrs. J., Richard Twining and George Road. We were all writers. It was a fine day, early in spring, and we were in a good humor. We talked about 100 things. Miss Waterford, torn between the aestheticism of her early youth, when she used to go to parties in sage green, holding a daffodil, and the flippancy of her maturer years, which tended to high heels and Paris frocks, wore a new hat. It put her in high spirits. I had never heard her more malicious about our common friends. Mrs. J., aware that impropriety is the soul of wit, made observations in tones hardly above a whisper that might well have tinged the snowy tablecloth with a rosy hue. Richard Twining bubbled over with quaint absurdities, and George Road, conscious that he need not exhibit a brilliancy which was almost a byword, opened his mouth only to put food into it. Mrs. Strickland did not talk much, but she had a pleasant gift for keeping the conversation general, and when there was a pause she threw in just the right remark to set it going once more. She was a woman of 37, rather tall and plump. Without being fat, she was not pretty, but her face was pleasing, chiefly, perhaps, on account of her kind brown eyes. Her skin was rather sallow. Her dark hair was elaborately dressed. She was the only woman of the three whose face was free of makeup, and by contrast with the others she seemed simple and unaffected.